Gregor Mendel, the Friar Who Grew Peas, by Cheryl Bardot, illustrated by Josh A. Smith. All his life, Gregor Mendel hungered for knowledge. Born in 1822 in a country that is now called the Czech Republic, Gregor grew up in a village with 71 houses, 479 people, 41 horses, and 98 cows. His father was a hard-working farmer who hoped his son would follow in his footsteps. Over time, the people of Gregor's village had learned that growing two kinds of apple trees together could produce better fruit, and that breeding two kinds of sheep together could yield thicker wool. Gregor longed to know why. How? He yearned to unlock nature's secrets and to share them with everyone. Gregor wanted more knowledge than the village grammar school could provide. The next level of school was a half a day's journey away. To attend, he would have to eat and sleep there. His parents scraped together every cent they could, but they could only afford to pay for classes, a bed, and half of Gregor's meals. 12-year-old Gregor went anyway. He chose to feed his mind and go without food to fill his grumbling belly. At school, he feasted on his lessons. Tragically, in 1838, Gregor's father broke his back and could no longer till his fields. Gregor later wrote an essay on his life. The scholar, then 16 years of age, was unfortunately compelled to fend for himself. Enterprising Gregor, by working as a tutor, paid his own way through 4 more years of school. Even when he was sick, Gregor never fell behind in his lessons. As he neared graduation, he worried that he could not find enough tutoring jobs to put food on the table next to his books. He feared that his growling stomach at last would halt his studies. It had become impossible to continue such strenuous exertions, he wrote. I needed to be spared perpetual anxiety about means of livelihood. Gregor's problem was solved when he became a friar at the Abbey of St. Thomas in a town called Brno. Gregor could feel his body, mind, and soul. His fellow friars preached sermons, cared for the sick, taught school, and were respected by community leaders. There were also mathematicians, botanists, philosophers, and geologists. They studied in a library where 30,000 books lined the walls. They discussed ideas over 3 plentiful meals each day. Surrounded by great thinkers, Gregor plunged into the further studies. He became addicted to nature. He later wrote, I would shrink from no exertions which might help me to fill the gaps in my information. The abbot, the head of the abbey, rewarded Gregor's zeal. He sent the young friar to the University of Vienna to study with some of the world's best scientists. There, Gregor learned that all of nature's miracles can be explained by a few simple rules called universal laws. Universal laws explain that some things will always act the same way, even in different settings. For example, the universal law of gravity tells us how things move through space, explaining why an apple will always fall towards Earth, whether it is dropped from a tree or from the tallest church spire. Gregor learned how to test such laws with careful, planned experiments. When Gregor returned to the abbey, the abbot sent him to teach science at a nearby school. Students liked Gregor's clear explanations and lively sense of humor. He could make any intellectual food nutritious and tasty, a student once said. Gregor liked nourishing young minds, but he still hungered to make a great discovery himself. He focused his attention on one of the hottest scientific questions of all time. How do mothers and fathers, whether they are apple trees, sheep, or humans, pass down the traits to their children? In Gregor's day, no one knew why the child might have his father's blue eyes and straight hair, while their brothers might have their mother's brown eyes and curly hair. Features such as brown eyes and curly hair are called traits. Gregor believed that all plants and animals pass down traits from parents to children the same way. By finding a pattern for how this occurs in one life form, he hoped to crack the code of all living things. Gregor reached how earlier scientists had paired different species or kinds of plants to see what their offspring or children would be like. The offspring of such matches called hybrids, but different types of corn, flowers, and wheat. Earlier scientists bred many hybrids, but studied only a few of them. Gregor had something else in mind. He would breed thousands of offspring from just a few pairings. He would count how often specific traits appeared. He would then see if math would help them find a pattern. If all went well, he would have a universal law that would apply to all living things. This plant family tree shows the outcome when two different parent plants pass on the traits, such as color, to a hybrid offspring. Gregor knew that he must choose plants for his experiment carefully. He studied 34 kinds of peas in his garden. At first, the plants looked so different that Gregor wondered how he would ever decide which specific traits to track. He looked more closely and noticed that all of the peas, which are a pea plant seeds, were either green or yellow. Gregor liked these traits because they were clearly distinct. Similarly, some of the peas were smooth and some of them were wrinkled. Gregor picked up 7 pairs of contrasting traits, such as these, to test in his experiment. He planned to breed each pair and record how often each trait appeared in their offspring. Before beginning the test, Gregor grew his plants again and again to be sure that each kind of pea always produced an offspring with the same trait. He wanted to be sure that any changes in the offspring were caused by his experiment. After 2 years of preparation, Gregor was eager to start breeding his plants to make hybrids. He knew that pea plants usually form seeds when pollen from one part of the flower fertilizes egg cells from another part of the same flower. To create his hybrids, he would Mendel with nature's process. In the spring, Gregor used tweezers to peel open the inner petals of the flower on a yellow pea plant. He snipped away the flower's stamen so that he could no longer make pollen. Then he brushed the egg cells in the same flower pistil with pollen from a green pea plant. When he was done, he tied a tiny sack around the flower to prevent another flower's pollen from drifting onto the breeze of the legs of a bee or a butterfly. This way, he was positive that no other plants had pollinated the flower. Step by step, Gregor pollinated 287 flowers by hand, working his way through 7 pairs of traits: smooth peas and wrinkled peas, yellow pea pods and green pea pods, smooth pea pods and bumpy pea pods, and so on. His fingers moved carefully, as a mistake might spoil his results. Then Gregor waited. He would not remove the sacks until the flowers had been replaced by pea pods filled with seeds. He nurtured the plants, and then he joked were his children. Fall finally came. Gregor eagerly split open each new ripened pea pods. What did he find? Pea plant flower, pistil, stamen, egg cells, or future peas. The yellow pea plants bred with the green pea plants had yielded all yellow peas. When he bred smooth peas with wrinkled peas, he got all smooth peas. Gregor observed that in each of the 7 pairs of traits, all the hybrid children looked like just one of the parents. Were the lost traits gone forever? What would the grandchildren and great-grandchildren look like? Gregor pondered these questions throughout the snowy winter. Come spring, he planted the seeds of the hybrids that he had bred. This time, he allowed nature to take its course, and he let the flowers fertilize themselves. He waited and watched. At harvest time, once again, Gregor split open the ripened pods. He discovered the yellow peas, green peas sitting side by side in the same pod. He also found wrinkled peas besides smooth peas. The missing traits had reappeared. Gregor planted the new generation of seeds and waited and watched again. When he harvested this crop, Gregor found that all the plants had grown from green peas sprouted pods that were filled with only green peas. Some of the plants grown from yellow peas sprouted pods with only yellows, but most of the plants grown from yellow peas sprouted pods with both yellow and green peas. Gregor planted the seeds 4 more times. In each of the different pairings, he achieved the same results. Had he discovered a pattern? Gregor's results reminded him of the math that he had studied at the university. Some of the numbers created a pattern, just like the one found in the peas. If the pea traits followed the same rules as the numbers, then each trait must be made of 2 separate parts that mix and match to create a pattern. Suddenly, Gregor was seeing heredity and how parents pass down traits to their children in an entirely new way. He concluded that every pea plant has 2 building blocks necessary to create one trait. Today, these blocks are called genes. For every trait, the mother and father plants each give one of their genes to their children. Gregor observed that one trait disappeared in the first generation of hybrids, but showed up again in later generations. First generation, second generation, third generation. Now Gregor knew that the pea plants that had been grown for the start of his experiment had always produced children exactly like themselves. The yellow pea plants had only yellow peas to give their children. When Gregor crossed the yellow peas with the green peas, each hybrid plant had 1 yellow pea and 1 green pea gene. In their first generation of hybrid plants, all the peas were yellow because the yellow gene hid the green gene from the view. But the green gene peas were still there to be passed down. Gregor called these genes that masked the others dominant and the genes that were hidden recessive. He found that the recessive genes are just as likely to dominate genes to be passed on to children. And whenever he received the gene meets up with another recessive gene, it surfaces for the world to see. This explains why the green pea had lost the other traits showed up again in later generations of Gregor's experiment. Gregor also discovered that the traits act independently. Being green in color did not make peas any more likely to be wrinkled or smooth in shape. Over 8 years, Gregor grew close to 28,000 pea plants. He also tested his theory in small trials on 14 other kinds of plants. Gregor's hunger for knowledge had led to a great discovery. It was time to tell the world. If we could see inside the peas, we would see that it has 2 genes, one from each parent to determine the traits of pea color. Here, Y represents the color of yellow, and G represents the color of green. In 1865, Gregor presented his findings to the Brno National History Society. A year later, he published them in a scientific journal. No one paid any attention. No one understood that his discovery was much more about peas. They could not connect the pea experiment with the apple tree, sheep, or people. Also, genes were too tiny to be seen on the microscope available in Gregor's day. Without more evidence that genes really existed, how could people believe in something they couldn't see? Gregor lost his appetite for plant experiments. He had recently been elected abbot, and the new duties absorbed his time. However, he could not surrender faith in his theory. He told friends, "My time will come." In 1884, after a long illness, Gregor died at the age of 63. The entire town mourned the passing of a beloved teacher and community leader. In 1900, 3 different scientists in 3 different countries stumbled onto paper that Gregor had published in 1865. Each was on the verge of repeating Gregor's discovery. Each was stunned at the foresight of this unknown friar. Although he received no glory during his lifetime, Gregor is now known as the first generation geneticist. He discovered all of Mendel's laws. Today, we use genetics to prevent and cure diseases and make crops hardier, solve crimes, and learn even more about nature's ways. More than a century after his death, Gregor's discoveries continued to fuel new insights about our world. The dream that he had written about the youth had been true. May the might of the destiny grant me the supreme ecstasy of earthly joy, the highest goal of earthly ecstasy, that of seeing, when I arise from the tomb, my art thriving peacefully among those who come after me. Scientists today use Gregor's discoveries to learn more about the genetic makeups of plants and animal life on Earth.